Support for WMFE comes from JustCallMo.com and attorney Mo DeWitt, proud presenter of WMFE's Engage program. Mo DeWitt is committed to offering legal guidance in personal injury cases, such as car accidents and slip and falls. Offices in Orlando. More at JustCallMo.com.
Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Engage explores Central Florida's issues and culture with new voices, new perspectives, and thought-provoking interviews. Engage is made possible with the support of members like you and inaugural sponsor, JustCallMo.com. Engage is hosted by Sharon Stone.
You are listening to Engage on 90.7 WMFE. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll look at trends in teen smoking and the state of film production in the state. First, though, the Alabama Supreme Court issued a ruling that determined frozen embryos are to hold the same consideration as children when defining life. The case dealt with an IVF clinic where a couple's embryos were accidentally destroyed. The couple sought to file a wrongful death suit, and the state Supreme Court decided the suit could proceed. This ruling was hailed by supporters of the anti-abortion movement.
The significance of the Alabama Supreme Court decision is to recognize that which science has recognized for a long time, which is that human life begins and is unique from the moment of fertilization and conception. It's a unique human being at that point, and it's entitled to worth and value and constitutional protection.
And that's Daniel Schmidt, Associate Vice President of Legal Affairs with the Liberty Counsel. That's a nonprofit that has offices in Central Florida and offers legal advocacy for Christian initiatives.
In Alabama, they have an amendment to their constitution called the Sanctity of Human Life Amendment, which recognizes that all government agencies and entities must protect the inherent value of human life from the moment of fertilization and conception. That's what led to this decision, which was embryos that were stored in a cryogenic nursery, they call it, that had been fertilized. And when they were destroyed, the parents were able to bring an unlawful death action or a wrongful death action because they had terminated human life. That's very significant because it recognized the inherent humanity of all embryos and life from the moment of conception and fertilization.
Here in Florida, they're fighting a ballot measure that would codify a woman's right to an abortion. Now, IVF providers in the state are keeping a keen eye on both our lawmakers and the Alabama ruling. Joining us now live on the line is Dr. Mark Trollis, a board-certified reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist with the IVF Center in Winter Park. Dr. Trollis, thank you so much for joining us here on Engage.
My pleasure, Sharon, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Let me start with this for our audience. Could you just briefly summarize what IVF is and how it works related to infertility?
Sure. IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is really fertilization outside the body. So a brief biology lesson, a woman ovulates one egg, releases one egg from the ovary every month, okay? And that's a normal menstrual cycle. So the body is preparing for pregnancy almost on a monthly basis, really. In vitro fertilization is where stimulating hormones are trying to increase the number of eggs that a woman actually will release on a monthly basis, all right? So one egg is naturally released, hundreds are lost on a monthly basis, okay? So giving ovarian stimulating hormones, we super ovulate a woman to produce more than one egg that's mature that we can use then to fertilize. The more eggs that are able to be created into embryos, the higher the chance of success for the woman. So after about 10, 12 days of stimulation, we monitor them every several days with ultrasounds and blood work. Then we will do what's called an egg retrieval, typically under intravenous conscious sedation, right in our office surgery center, where most are done across the country. So we put a needle, ultrasound-guided needle aspiration device through the vagina into the ovary and vacuum out the eggs. It takes about 15 minutes or so to do. The patient's under sedation, and then she's really able to leave within the hour. those eggs are identified in the laboratory by the microscope because they are microscopic. And then we inseminate about 4 to 6 hours later with the partner's sperm or source of sperm desired. Then we put them in the incubator, allow the embryos to develop for ultimately embryo transfer. Sometimes they just want to freeze their eggs. Sometimes they want to freeze the embryos. And we do freeze embryos that are not utilized after the embryo transfer. So that's the basics of IVF.
Okay, help me understand then this Alabama ruling. Which stage is it impacting in terms of what you do in this procedure?
Well, it would be the stage of insemination. So on the day of the egg retrieval and sperm are added, within that 24-hour period, an embryo has developed. So this ruling, as it were, applies to an embryo, which is a fertilized egg. But a lot can be said about what has occurred by this ruling of making the Wrongful Death Act that was applying to a minor child is quite the leap to make it an intrauterine pregnancy, and even further, extrauterine collection of cells that are labeled as an embryo. So that was never identified in the law of what a minor child is, but it has been now interpreted as being intrauterine as well as extrauterine tissue.
Okay, so Alabama's largest hospital is halting IVF treatments after this court ruling. Is that a reasonable reaction, in your opinion?
Well, I think the ruling was not necessarily reasonable in terms of this, because what the Supreme Court did in Alabama was not distinguish between life and the potential for life. The potential for life is an embryo, but they did not make that definition, and they basically just had a blanket statement regarding that. So there isn't a clinic in Alabama, I think, that feels comfortable freezing embryos because of there's so many questions, Sharon, about this process. There's more questions than answers at this time. So say we freeze embryos and then we thaw one and it doesn't survive. Is that murder? Is that clinic going to be then susceptible to criminal charges? We don't know what's going on at this point, but it is a very concerning, pervasive movement that people feel is being stimulated by the anti-abortion movement. There's in Louisiana, there's a law that prohibits doctors from discarding any viable embryos that are still dividing. Now, in your intro, the sanctity of life was mentioned. I don't think there's a field of medicine that is more pro-life than IVF, because we're helping the 1 in 6 people in the world that are trying to conceive, and we're doing everything to do that. But unfortunately, what this ruling has done was, without justification, without any medical or legal support, and it's affecting a field that has been effective for nearly half a century. So it's now resulting in the unjustified withholding of known treatment to 1 in 6 people that are struggling to build a family, when the AMA and the World Health Organization has labeled infertility a disease. Now the Alabama ruling has now prevented that disease from being treated.
Are you concerned about this movement that you mentioned coming into Florida? And what are you hearing from your community, from doctors, or maybe even your patients?
Well, everybody's concerned, of course, but I don't think Florida is alone in its concern, right? This, what's called personhood, trying to label an embryo as a person, has been around for several years, and it has been voted down by whenever it has reached a ballot. But I don't think there's any state that is going to feel safe from the concern that's going on. Now, there is a bill that has been presented in Congress called the Duckworth-Murray-Wild bill. That's an IVF Protection Act to really safeguard IVF from any of these types of laws that could impair the ability for patients to be treated. But Sharon, there's consequences to ponder about this. And, is this infringing on the reproductive rights of women to be able to have a child? It's turning embryo cryopreservation, which is freezing cryopreservation tanks, into frozen nurseries, essentially, right? What about chromosomally abnormal embryos? We're not going to transfer them, but this ruling in Alabama causes patients to pay for frozen embryos in perpetuity because they can't discard them. And these embryos will not be transferred because they're abnormal. What about even further corollaries of this, Sharon, is that will frozen embryos compel child support following divorce, right? And if it is a child, are they going to get tax credit for their embryos that are frozen? This is not just for reproductive medicine, but this is a very concerning time because there are some religious influences in the scientific world that really should be distinguished.
If this were to progress in Florida, what would your next step look like?
Well, until something is absolutely finalized, I try not to alarm my staff or patients. Infertility patients have suffered with anxiety and stress over their inability to have a child. When you're trying to conceive, the whole world looks pregnant. My wife and I were infertility patients for 10 years, and we had gone through multiple cycles of IVF, and then finally we were blessed with adopting our children. But if this has ever reached the point that legally prohibits the ability to discard embryos and consider embryos as unborn children that are protected under the Wrongful Death Act, there's going to be a lot of concerns over what type of reproductive medicine we're able to apply. Our hands would be tied from being able to apply treatment that we know that can help many, many women. About 2% of live births in this country are from IVF. So you basically, the corollary is to say that, a person comes in with heart disease, they have multiple abnormalities of the heart, that they could benefit from having a stent to save their life, but a stent is not natural. We don't think that we should be able to apply that technology. It's tying hands of a physician that is trying to help pro-life actually bring life into the world.
Dr. Mark Trallis is the founder of the IVF Center in Winter Park. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today here.
My pleasure, Sharon. Thank you.
There's more ahead here on Engage on 90.7 WMFE. The State of Tobacco report shows that Florida is failing. DEI comes to D&D. Engage is available on demand at WMFE.org and the WMFE mobile app or anywhere that you get your podcasts. You are listening to Engage on 90.7 WMFE. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, the world of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games has traditionally been populated by a very specific demographic.
There was definitely a stereotype of just white, male, grungy, doesn't have very much personal hygiene, and that still sticks in a lot of people's heads.
We will talk with a pair of game shop owners who are turning that stereotype on its head. First, though, the American Lung Association gave the state of Florida an F grade for failing to protect its residents from the dangers of tobacco. The annual State of Tobacco report cites a lack of attention to mitigating sales and use. The data shows a disproportionate rate of smoking among the state's black population. And it says Florida fails to create effective restrictions on flavored products that target teens. Dr. Candace Jones is a pediatrician in Orlando working with patients from infancy through adulthood. We talked to her about the trends she's seeing in youth tobacco and vape use, what she's hearing from kids and parents, and ways she feels the state could do better at fighting smoking and vaping.
we have to go all the way back to development when we talk about kids and why they do what they do. And as a pediatrician, we know that the minds of children are developing. So anytime that any industry can market to them, make things cool, make it look like all the kids are doing it, have wonderful, appealing flavors and packaging, making it undetectable. I'm doing something, taboo. It looks like a pen. They can't tell. So when we appeal to them and their developing mind, we've got them when we target our advertising and all of these things. And so that's what has happened with our young people in this trap of flavors, of crafty packaging, of bells and whistles, and a product that is addictive, nicotine, on a young developing mind. And that is what is causing this increase in youth using these electronic delivery uh, systems for nicotine, and then as a gateway back to cigarettes. The evidence shows that.
Meaning they start with the vaping and then turn to cigarettes?
The vaping is the most common tobacco product used by young people, and the evidence shows it is a gateway to you back to cigarettes, and not as it's marketed as a cessation tool. It doesn't help them not smoke cigarettes or stop smoking cigarettes. It actually is a gateway for young people to go on to smoke cigarettes.
Part of the report that was critical, the association accused tobacco companies of targeting teens with those flavored products you were just talking about, such as e-cigarettes that are sold with these fruity flavors. Tobacco companies have said they are not intending to reach children. Their intended customers are adults. Are you saying that that's not possible?
Well, regardless as to what their intentions are, which we can question, we know what's happening on the ground. And young people are gravitating to those products, the flavors and the bells and whistles. And so once you see this growth in young people using your products, the responsible thing to do would be to try to stop that.
Dr. Jones, what do kids tell you when they tell you they smoke?
They don't want to tell you. So at least they know they shouldn't be. Parents, frown upon that, and they know they shouldn't be. They know that they need to hide it. That's why they go for the ones that look like the flash drives or the pens or whatever. So they know that they shouldn't be using the products. So pediatricians do need to be crafty when we ask about these touchy subjects that teens know they shouldn't be doing. And we should be screening and asking questions that will yield the truth so that we can counsel and empower young people to turn away or even stop using the products.
You can tell when somebody's smoked. You can smell it on their clothes. Can you tell when somebody vapes?
Not necessarily. It is, I have a very strong sense of smell. And you're right. I can smell cigarette smoke on families in the clinic when they come through the door, or once they've made it back to the exam room and I'm coming in 30 minutes to an hour later. I can smell cigarette smoke, I can smell marijuana, but I can't really smell the vape aerosol, that liquid. And sometimes they're doing it in the room and I can't smell it. But the thing about that is that's more dangerous, right? Because you know, smoking and marijuana, those things, we can't do those in public places, right? Because of
Yeah.
the second and third hand smoke. With the vape aerosol, it's undetectable and it is contaminated with harmful smoke or aerosol. There are toxins there. And so we do need to get that out of the environment, especially in a pediatrician's office where there's young babies. So it can be a problem, that hidden secondhand smoke that is in the environment. And that is a point of advocacy for us taking it out of our places where we live, work, and play.
That is so interesting. My goodness. As part of this report, it's among those most hurt by tobacco products are Orange County's Black residents. And even Orange County's Department of Health indicates a quarter of Black men living in the county smoke cigarettes. Do you see that same disparity in younger smokers?
I know about that statistic, but I don't know if it rings true for Black youth as well. I would guess that it does, but I can't say with certainty. My patient population is predominantly people of color. And I would say that a number of my patients use these products and we talk about these products. And within their homes, if someone is smoking, and the likely of them using menthol-based tobacco products, which is more harmful and heavily marketed to the African American community, is problematic.
Any thoughts on whether part of the problem is tobacco marketing or if more needs to be done to access programs to help you quit?
I think it's all of it. This is not going to be a either or, it's a both and, it's all of it. And so I think we do have to hit this huge problem with a multi-level approach. Number one, we know there has been regulation, but there are gaps in regulation. And so at a state, a local, a federal level, that can be tightened up. There can be more efforts. For example, we know right now there's a ban to sell e-cigarette products to young people under 18. There are calls to make that 21. And so that's just one thing, but there are many other things that could curb advertising, curb marketing, make the packaging more safe for young people not to get into them. When we think about our poison control centers having increased calls to young children getting into the solutions and the harm it can do to them as far as it being a poison. So all of those things, banning internet sales, there are many points of regulation that can be tightened upon. We need to get rid of these flavors, the menthol, as you mentioned, and all the catchy flavors that young people really gravitate to. So there are so many things, even at a state or local level, taxing these products, e-cigarettes, in comparable rates that we tax cigarettes, and then removing them from our local environments, creating tobacco-free laws and ordinances that make places that kids live, work, and play, all of us, more safe, where we're not getting that secondhand smoke from these vape products.
And Dr. Jones, what impacts do you see on these young patients from either smoking or vaping?
I think the impact is something we have to follow over time. And I think that is an area where we continue to have research, right? That we need that research. But I think what we know is that addictive potential of it and the gateway effect of I've normalized this, the cigarette or the vaping instrument. And now what type of risk does it put me in to now go on to try other things? Oh, I did that. That wasn't so bad. They said it was bad. Oh, okay, maybe this marijuana or this other thing, some other type of drug. And so those are the things that worry me, and that we know are the risk and dangers to young people. Health effects, absolutely, heart disease, cancer. These products contain carcinogens, all types of toxins, antifreeze. Who wants to be smoking antifreeze? Is in some of these liquids.
Oh, gosh.
And all liquids are not the same, right? You don't know what you're getting. And so, all types of health problems are potential from smoking these devices.
Dr. Candace Jones is a pediatrician in Central Florida. Tobacco companies have said their intended customers are adults. In 2016, Florida concluded a fund that provided a tax incentive to attract the film and TV production industry to the state. A program that forfeited nearly $300 million in tax revenue generates more than $1 billion in in-state expenditures by production projects. Since then, production companies have gone to Georgia and the Carolinas to film, states that offer favorable incentives. Film Commissioner and Executive Director of Film Tampa Bay, Tyler Martinolik, says other states offer tax breaks or other incentives that are appealing.
In 2015, which was the last year we had a statewide incentive, we were actually the third largest filming destination in the United States. Since then, we've precipitously fallen, and now we're not even in the top 20.
Laura Chin is an actor and director and a Florida native. Her most recent project as director is Suncoast. This is a semi-autobiographical film telling the story of Chin's terminally ill brother and the national figure who is staying at his hospital. The story takes place in Florida. It was shot in Georgia due to these tax incentives. Chin joined Engage to talk about Suncoast and the challenges of filming in Florida. She started the conversation by describing the real-life experience that led to filming Suncoast.
When I was 18, my brother was in hospice in Pinellas Park, and we lived in Clearwater. And Terry Schiavo was also there in 2005 at the same time. So my mom and I were kind of, visiting hospice, going in and out of that facility. And there was protesters and media and all of that. And my brother passed away like 5 days after her. So we were really there, the entire time. So that's that's where the idea sort of started to form, and my own experiences with grief and trying to tell a story about grief. And then so the other details were invented.
And just to refresh people's memory, for several years, there was that legal battle over removing Terry Schiavo's feeding tube while in a persistent vegetative state before she died in Florida in 2005 in hospice. And so you're dealing with that media circus and trying to deal with what's happening with your own family at the same time.
Yeah, that's sort of why I wanted to talk about it, because it's an interesting thing to be, you sort of see how personal the Terry Schiavo story was to her family, to everyone in her family, to her husband, to her parents, and they all had to sort of process all that media too. And then, my mother and I and my father, who lived in a different state, he would fly in, and my aunt would come. And, so my whole family was kind of also a part of this thing. It's so personal when you're losing someone. It's such a personal kind of intimate, you want it to be like an intimate, small experience. And then you're sort of this backdrop of this huge experience is going on outside the window.
When did you know that your story could be something bigger in terms of a screenplay?
I started thinking about it. It really, this is so true with almost everything I've written, is that I talk about it to someone and they go, "What?" Because I think when things are happening to you, you're like, "Oh, this is just normal." This is just how we deal with life. Life just kind of things happen. And then when I talk about it to someone, if I mentioned to someone, if I'm talking about my brother and I mentioned, "Oh yeah, that whole Terry Schiavo thing was happening," at the same time, people are like, "What?" And so the show I did, Florida Girls, it was the same thing. I'd tell a story and people would react. And so that's sort of given me my feedback in terms of what might be interesting to people is how people react when I'm kind of casually mentioning a tidbit about my life.
Was it hard to open up about something so personal?
I've done so much therapy. I've talked about it, I've talked so much about it, in so many different ways, so many different kinds of therapy. I definitely got emotional while writing the script, and I wrote a very personal book, and I got emotional while writing that. But there's such a benefit of sharing vulnerable stories when people react, no matter how many people, one person reading something you wrote and saying, "I relate to that," or "I feel seen," or "I went through that," is so healing. And the feeling of human connection is so worth it, so that it's like, yes, it's vulnerable, but it's extremely worth it.
Do you feel like that's two-way? It's both healing for you and the people that you're hearing from sharing with you?
Oh gosh, I hope it's healing for them. I don't know. I mean, I hope it's healing for them, but it is for me. It's when you go through something challenging, sometimes it feels like you're the only one, especially you go on social media and everyone's out having fun, and, life seems like it's a ball for everybody else. And so the way that our world is set up, it can sometimes feel like you're the only one going through something hard, and you can sort of feel like an alien in that way. And so, yeah, somebody saying, "This happened to me too," the first time somebody said, "Hey, I read something, or I watched something you made, and I really resonated with it," I was like, "Oh my God, that is an incredible feeling," just feeling connected.
You mentioned being involved with writing Florida Girls, and we're talking about Suncoast now. What is it about these Florida films? Do you feel like there's this expectation that it has to be an unbelievable or just wild story?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think Florida in the media, and Florida Man and the Twitter, and it's gotten a reputation for being a very intense place. But and it's funny, it is intense at the same time, like you think about the weather that comes through Florida, like these extremes, these climate extremes and hurricanes and sinkholes. I mean, sinkholes are wild. The idea that your backyard could just fall into the earth, like there is a sort of just natural extremeness to the climate and to the environment that might contribute to some of the behavior. But I also, I see headlines from Arizona, that are pretty colorful and far out human behavior. And you see headlines from New Jersey and you see, and Michigan, and you start to realize like, oh, I think the media just sort of likes to pick up on Florida stories and spread them around because people read them and are entertained by like, oh, what's Florida Man up to? But I don't necessarily think it's actually this major outlier in our country, as if no one else ever behaves this way,
Mhm. And this was, as we're talking about, set in Florida. Ironically, you didn't film it in Florida. Can you talk about where you did film this?
I wanted to film in Florida so badly, especially in Clearwater, because I think one movie has been filmed in Clearwater, A Dolphin Tale. Yeah, that it was like a movie about Winter the dolphin. We had her. I don't know if she's still there, but we had her at our aquarium. And so that was the one movie that was filmed there, and I really wanted to film a movie there because it's so cinematic. The west coast of Florida is so beautiful. The sunsets are so beautiful. The sand is truly like, paradise sand, like white talcum powder, soft, beautiful sand. And there's just things about the colors that you can't really find elsewhere. And so I really wanted to film there. But there's no tax credit in Florida. Florida lost their tax credit, I believe, in 2016 for filmmaking. They no longer offer a tax credit. And so we ended up in Charleston, and they gave us a tax credit that made it possible to make the movie. Like it got down to, because I was kind of being stubborn, and I was like, no, I really want to film in Florida. Let's figure it out. And as people crunched the numbers and really tried to, our producers really passionately, because our Kevin Chenoy and Francesca Silvestri live in Miami, and they produce the Florida Project, and they love, Florida films. And so everybody was supporting this idea of how do we figure this out? How do we make this work? But it just, we couldn't do it. We wouldn't have been able to make the film. So we had to go to Charleston, and Charleston was amazing. I mean, they were really helpful, and their film commission is super supportive of filmmakers, and they gave us a wonderful tax credit, and it made it possible, but then we went to Clearwater for like 3 days and filmed exteriors to try to capture some of that unique Florida beauty. But yeah, it was definitely not ideal to not be able to shoot in the state we were trying to talk about.
Sure. Was that the main obstacle that you ran into in terms of not being able to film in Florida? No
That was
tax
it.
credit.
Yeah,
That was
that
it.
was really it. Yeah, because we were told that, there's crew in Tampa, there's people that, like people want to work, and really good people. We were hearing, oh, this amazing guy, in Tampa does this thing, and this other amazing person does this thing, and there's this woman that can do that, so we were like, yeah, let's film there, let's hire local crew, let's do it. No, it was not to be.
What do you hope people take away when they watch Suncoast?
I mean, I hope they take away whatever they want to, like it's hard to tell people, especially with movies. One of my favorite things is people messaging me about these different moments in the ending that resonated with them. And some of those moments I'm like, oh, I didn't see it that way, but I love that they did, I love that their takeaway was, whatever it is, because I think that's what's so amazing about art. But it's definitely a movie about grief. It's lighthearted and it's comedic, but it's about grief at its core, and the way people grieve and the way people treat each other when they're grieving. And I think ultimately the idea is that I think grief and loss can be bearable if you have people around you to support you. If you have those relationships that help keep you buoyed through the experience, you can survive it. And it's ultimately a mother-daughter movie, and about this idea that they're each grieving differently, which is causing them to have a rift between them. But if they can come together, they can get through it, is ultimately the idea. But somebody might watch it and feel like that's not the idea at all. So I'm open.
And as you were doing this film, you get to work with names like Woody Harrelson, Laura Linney. How was that experience working with these A-listers?
It's so hard to find the words. The whole thing has felt like an out-of-body experience. They're two of the kindest. It's so funny because they're the two of the most talented people I've ever worked with, two of the most successful people I've ever worked with, and then two of the kindest people I've ever worked with. So you're like, how did we get these blessings? I don't know. I'm so thankful that they agreed to do the movie. I'm so thankful they responded to the script. I learned so much from watching them. And at the same time, they let me direct the movie and they let it feel like it was my story. And then they added so much to the movie, so much to the characters beyond my imagination of what an actor is capable of doing. It was really, yeah, they're amazing. I'm very, very thankful for them.
Laura Chin is the director of Suncoast. It is currently streaming on Hulu. Coming up, the world of role-playing games is expanding to include all gamers. You're listening to Engage on 90.7 WMFE. You're listening to Engage on WMFE 90.7. I'm Sharon Stone. The growing tabletop gaming industry is serious business. These inventors are in the business of card and board games, not video game consoles. It can take time for the gamers to find their ideal gaming community, especially if they don't feel like they fit into this multi-billion-dollar industry. Gamers like Jenna Vong, we met her at the Haven Games as she was playing with a group of friends. She explained why she enjoys coming to Haven.
One of the things that I find really challenging as a woman is when you go into a gaming store, a lot of times to play a new game, it's very intimidating to come into a new space, people you don't know, and be treated fairly. And one of the things that I've really loved about Haven is they've made an effort to make it a space for everybody, regardless of your skill level, regardless of your familiarity with the game. And they've really made it a point to make it an open space for everybody. So now we come with friends that we made here, and we come on our free time when they don't host events to learn new games, like Sorcery, which I just am learning today.
Matthew and Allie Heffelfinger are the husband and wife owners of the Haven Games. Their business model is predicated on inclusivity and providing a safe gaming space for everybody. I met with them at their store and event venue in Castleberry, and I asked them to describe the typical gamer.
We're all gamers, just different varieties.
I think we're fortunate enough right now that there's not a stereotype any longer. Because I know growing up, I was always a nerdy girl. I really liked Pokemon and Star Wars and stuff like that. And that didn't fit into the I like Disney princesses and I wear pink. Now, anyone can be a gamer. Anyone can be a nerd. And it's cool to be a nerd. And it's really, really great. So I mean, when you look around and see all the different faces and people in our store, there's not one stereotype of the guy with thick-rimmed glasses wearing a pocket protector. Like, we're not there anymore, and it's really, really great that that walking around and walking into the store, you can see any kind of person. Like, I don't think we have a specific, this is what a gaming nerd is anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely like that stereotype from, like when we were growing up, there was definitely a stereotype of just white, male, grungy, doesn't have very much personal hygiene, and that still sticks in a lot of people's heads. Mm-hmm. And there's still a lot of stores that kind of are stuck in that era, where they don't clean up the store, everything's kind of dirty, but there's a space, and that's all people care about. And we wanted to kind of be the antithesis of that, clean, put together, respectable, I guess you could say, grown up.
We want
in a way
everyone to feel welcome, because even in my early teens and 20s going to play Magic at other stores, I was always one of two girls. And now if you look around here, there's more than 3 of us. Like we're doing it. And so it's really cool that I think in 2024 we can kind of sit around and realize that like a gamer is literally anyone, you know?
Part of the reason that was so important is because what you saw your wife go through as a gaming.
So, I mean, you can tell the story. People just like judging you and thinking that you don't know anything about a game just because you're a girl.
Yeah, I, used to have bright colored hair. I'm a little bit small in stature, and so they'd be like, oh, you're just here with your boyfriend, like, you don't know anything about Magic. And I'd be like, no, like, I really like this game. I'm here because I want to be here. If he wanted to play without me, he could. I'm here because I also want to play. So, like, they would try to explain the cards to me, and I'm like, no, I can read. I know what they say. So it got really frustrating to go to these tournaments with him because I didn't enjoy playing by myself because I would always be against someone who was just talking down to me the entire time. And, like, that was when I was in my early 20s. That's 10 years ago. Like, and now we wanted to create a space that never felt like that for anyone.
Yeah. And that's just applies across, like, anybody in the store. It's not just like, oh, like, my wife did this, so we're going to protect people like my wife. It's just like, no, like, nobody
should feel like
should
that.
be playing a game and feel like somebody's just like, oh, you don't know anything. Automatically, I just assume you don't know anything because of X, Y, or Z. It's just like, sportsmanship applies across everybody.
But
just
also,
be chill and enjoy the game.
If you don't know something, I don't want anyone to feel afraid to ask. If you want to get into a game that's existed for a long time and you've never played it, come in and ask. That's one of the things we train our staff to be able to talk about board games and talk about card games and stuff, because we want to be able to we want that sense of community so that if people would like to come in and learn new games, they can.
Yeah, there's no time that you're more vulnerable than when you're like, oh, I want to learn a new thing, and somebody like treats you poorly, or like, oh, you don't know about this, and you're like, oh, well, now I kind of don't want to know about this, because if that's what I'm going to get getting into this, like, I'm out. I'll cut my losses. I haven't invested any time. I'm done. But, if you're welcomed and, explain things without being condescending or anything like that, you're going to have a good time.
Matthew went on to talk about the origins of gaming culture and the irony of how it led to the toxicity that gamers like the Heffelfingers are trying to flush from the community.
It's always been a place for people that felt different, because even in the 80s, when you were playing D&D with your friends, you were playing D&D with your friends because somebody probably bullied you because you were a nerd and you weren't playing football and you weren't interested in sports. Not everybody was like that, but there were a lot of people that's what brought them to D&D, and that's where they made friends, and that's where their life was in that game, which is part of why, like, mothers and parents, like, were easily convinced that it was like a satanic thing, because their kids would not do anything outside, which is what you were supposed to do, and you would just be playing games in your basement or in the shed or wherever you felt away from everybody else because you didn't feel accepted by other people, which is why it never really made sense to me that the nerd community was also very gatekeepy to people of color, or people of like transgender, or people of different sexual orientations, because like the reason you came here was because you were rejected by someone else, or you were bullied by someone else. Why are you passing that down? So I think we're coming to a point where, like, there's so many people that have they feel different and they don't feel accepted by other people that are a part of this community now, that we're getting to a point where it's like everybody is realizing, oh, we're all here because we're different, or we're all different just in general, so that it's becoming less and less common that I have to, like, keep people in check. I've only had to say a few things to a few people, just like, hey, by the way, you shouldn't talk like that. Don't say that. That word's not a good word.
Hella Farhat moved to Orlando 2 years ago with her wife. Hella works as a game master at Haven. As a lesbian gamer from a Palestinian family, she brings a unique perspective from the gaming world. She joined us at the store to talk about her role there and her experiences entering the gaming community.
I do a lot of talking to people who are new into the scene. I really like trying to get people into it a little bit more, just because it can be intimidating. So I like to make it feel as not intimidating as physically possible, because the barrier for entry can be quite a lot. So we do a lot of card games here, so we explain the card games, the board games, how the games work, and a little bit of, if you're interested in this, how you get started.
I think what originally just drew me to the story was I was talking to someone who comes, she just feels really comfortable here, like as a woman, and people who feel different feel good here. Do you feel that way?
I work very hard to make it feel that way. Like, I already felt really comfortable when I first came in here, and I make it like a personal mission of mine to feel even more comfortable. I know that women coming into the space, it can feel intimidating. Minorities coming into the space, it feels intimidating. And one thing I'm always really happy about, we have like a little LGBT section over there where we have like little dice, and the proceeds go to a charity for LGBT rights advocacy, the Trevor Project. So I'm always happy when people come in, and oftentimes, like, we've had a couple times people come in and they buy the dice and they're really happy and they're like, I've never had dice like this and it's really nice, and I don't have to tell people my identity before we play games. They just see my dice and they know, and it's not a conversation. Or like, we've had young people come in and their parents leave and they come back and they're like, oh, I bought this dice while my dad was in the store because it makes me feel seen, and I'm just not ready to talk to them about it, but it's nice for me to have, makes me feel happy. So stuff like that is beautiful.
Do you feel like that is still the case, or have we moved away from that, or is there a concerted effort here not to do that?
I would say that we have a concerted effort here to, because there's a certain toxicity associated with that kind of person, where it's almost like paradoxically, they're like, there's no women in the scene, and then the women show up and they're like, get out of here. So we work really hard to be like, this is a welcoming place. Nobody here is unwelcome. Gender identity, background, minority status of any kind, you are welcome here. And I think that's part of like why it's called The Haven, is like it's a haven for everybody, So we really emphasize here that we used to have it playing, but we don't anymore. Rules of the store, which are like, if you're going to swear at someone excessively over like a card game, you're not welcome anymore. If you're going to obviously say any kind of like slurs in here, you are no longer welcome. Anything that makes someone feel like they are less than, you're not welcome in the store.
Do you have a favorite game that you can tell us about?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big fan of D&D. I think that's honestly, you might not know this, but it's a little bit of a trope that like LGBT people are very into D&D. But I am, my wife is, we play it all the time. D&D I feel like is a really good way. It used to be very male dominated, very like boys club only. And I honestly have been trying to get a game going for like women's only game for the store, because a lot of women come in and they tell me they want to play and they don't know how and they feel intimidated and they don't want to just join a random game because you might get a guy who's mouth breathing and saying weird stuff at you. So I get it. And for me personally, I'm Palestinian, so I work really hard to encourage other Arab people to come, because it's a nice form of like self-expression, relaxation, unwinding. And when I DM, which is what I do, which means I run the games, I write the scenarios, I work on like how people interact with the world and the story, I put a lot of my background in it. And it is a little bit of a way for me to, because I'm not home anymore, obviously, to bring people into my world a little bit and show them parts of the world they haven't considered before.
Hella Farhat is a game master at Haven Games. That's all for today's edition of Engage. Join us Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for the company. All Things Considered is coming up.